The moment Alara Vance's bloodied fingers touched the obsidian seal hidden beneath the floorboards, she knew her life as a ghost was over. For 15 years, she'd scrubbed marble until her knuckles cracked, kept her eyes down, her voice silent. But the Duke had returned, and he'd seen something in her that no one else had. Now she stood in the grand hall, surrounded by nobles who wanted her dead, holding proof of a birthright that could either save her or destroy everything. This is the story of a servant who became a weapon, a ghost who became a storm. Stay with me until the end, drop a like and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The cold arrived before the Duke did. It came in through the cracks in the stone walls of Halbrecht Manor, seeping into corridors that hadn't been properly heated in 3 winters. Alara Vance felt it first in her hands, the kind of cold that made scrubbing worse, made the lye soap bite deeper into already raw skin. She knelt in the East Wing corridor, her brush moving in steady, practiced strokes across marble that gleamed like ice under the morning light filtering through tall windows. She'd learned long ago not to look up when footsteps approached. "You missed a spot." The voice belonged to Mrs. Haverton, the head housekeeper, a woman whose spine had calcified into something resembling iron over 40 years of service. Alara's brush didn't pause. She'd learned that too. Hesitation looked like defiance. "Where, ma'am?" "Near the 3rd column. And don't use that tone with me, girl." Alara hadn't used any tone at all, but she nodded anyway. "Yes, ma'am." The footsteps retreated, sharp and purposeful against stone. Alara allowed herself a single slow breath before dipping her brush back into the bucket. The water had gone gray an hour ago, but fresh water meant walking down 4 flights of stairs to the servants' well, and she had 6 more corridors before midday meal. If there was a midday meal. The manor had been hemorrhaging staff for months. First the groundskeepers, then half the kitchen crew, then the stable hands. The old Duke had died last spring, a stroke, they said, though the whispers in the servants' quarters suggested poison. His son had been away for nearly a decade, serving in some military campaign in the northern territories that no one quite understood. Without a master, the estate had begun to collapse in on itself like a dying star. The remaining servants worked double shifts, triple sometimes. Alara worked until her vision blurred, until she forgot what it felt like to stand without her back aching. She was 17, though no one knew for certain. She'd been found on the manor's doorstep as an infant, a common enough story for unwanted children in the duchy. The old Duke's wife had been a pious woman, given to charity when it didn't inconvenience her. She'd allowed the child to be raised in the servants' quarters, a living act of mercy that cost her nothing. Alara had no memory of her. The Duchess had died when Alara was 5. What she remembered instead were the kitchens, the laundry rooms, the endless stone corridors that smelled like beeswax and old money. She remembered learning to read by stealing glimpses of discarded newspapers in the rubbish bins. She remembered the way Cook used to save her the bread crusts that were too hard to serve. She remembered the winter she'd gotten sick, burning with fever in a storage room, and how no one had noticed for 3 days. She'd survived anyway. The brush in her hand had worn down to a nub. She'd need to request a new one from Mrs. Haverton, which meant enduring another lecture about wastefulness and the cost of supplies. Alara had learned to make things last. Soap, candles, hope. A commotion echoed from the main entrance, raised voices, the clatter of trunks being unloaded, the stamp of horses. Alara's hands stilled. Around her she could hear other servants pausing in their work, the manor holding its breath. He was here. Duke Rowan Halbrecht had returned. Mrs. Haverton's voice cut through the sudden tension like a blade. "Back to work. All of you. Do you think His Grace wants to see lazy hands standing idle?" Alara bent lower over her work, making herself smaller. It was a skill she'd perfected, the art of occupying space without being noticed. She heard boots on marble, heavy and deliberate. Military boots. The kind that had seen real use. "Christ, it's freezing in here." The voice was male, younger than she'd expected. It carried the kind of casual authority that came from never being told no. Alara kept scrubbing. "The 3rd column." Mrs. Haverton had said the 3rd column. "Your Grace, we've prepared the study as you requested, and your chambers have been aired and—" "Where's Callum? I sent word 3 weeks ago." A pause. Alara recognized the particular quality of that silence. It was the sound of someone choosing their words very carefully. Mr. Callum departed service 2 months past, Your Grace, along with several others. How many? 14, Your Grace. 14. The word came out flat. In 2 months. The estate has been difficult to maintain in your absence. Footsteps again, closer now. Alara's shoulders tense despite herself. Don't look up. Don't draw attention. Be invisible. And who's this? The question landed in the corridor like a stone dropped into still water. Alara's brush froze mid-stroke. Heat crawled up her neck, the kind of mortified warmth that came from being singled out. No one, Your Grace, just one of the housemaids. She has a name. The silence that followed felt like falling. Alara's pulse hammered in her ears. Slowly, moving like something underwater, she raised her head. The Duke stood 10 feet away, backlit by the tall windows. He was younger than his father had been when Alara had last seen the old Duke. Maybe 30, though it was hard to tell. His face had the kind of hardness that came from violence survived rather than violence imagined. Dark hair, darker eyes. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, pale against tanned skin. He wore traveling clothes, well made but dusty from the road. He was looking directly at her. What's your name? Alara's throat had gone dry. She managed to unstick her tongue from the roof of her mouth. Alara, Your Grace. Alara. He said it slowly, like he was testing the weight of it. How long have you worked here? All my life, Your Grace. Something flickered in his expression, too quick to read. And you're how old? 17, Your Grace, I think. You think? I don't know exactly, Your Grace. He studied her for a moment longer, long enough that Alara felt her skin prickle with discomfort. Then he turned to Mrs. Haverton. Get her out of the corridors. Find her something else to do. Your Grace, she's scheduled for... Did I stutter? Mrs. Haverton's spine somehow became even more rigid. No, Your Grace? Good. He turned away, dismissing them both. I want every department head in the study in an hour. And get a fire started in the east parlor before someone dies of cold. He strode off, flanked by what Alara now recognized as guards. Men with the same worn look, the same watchful eyes. Mrs. Haverton waited until he disappeared around the corner before rounding on Alara. On your feet. Alara stood, her knees protesting. The bucket of dirty water sloshed. You'll report to the kitchens until I decide what to do with you. And if His Grace asks you another question, you keep your answers short and respectful. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. I won't have you embarrassing this household with your gutter-snipe manners. Alara had been raised in this household, had spent 17 years learning its rhythms and rules, but she simply nodded. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Haverton swept away, leaving Alara alone in the corridor with her bucket and her racing thoughts. She knelt again, finished the section near the third column, then hauled the bucket toward the servants' stairs. In the kitchens, chaos reigned. Cook, a massive woman named Beatrice, who'd been with the household for 30 years, was shouting orders at 2 young scullery maids who looked ready to cry. The hearth blazed with 3 different pots going at once, and the air smelled like roasting meat and burning pastry. Where's the rosemary? I asked for rosemary an hour ago. We're out, ma'am. Out? How in hell are we out of... Beatrice spotted Alara in the doorway. You. Stop standing there like a simpleton and get me herbs from the garden. Rosemary, thyme, and sage. Move. Alara moved. The kitchen garden was on the south side of the manor, sheltered from the worst of the wind. She found rosemary easily enough. It grew like a weed in the rocky soil, but had to dig for the sage. Her fingers were numb by the time she finished, dirt packed under her broken nails. When she returned, Beatrice snatched the herbs without a word and shoved a knife into Alara's hands. Chop these, fine as you can manage, and don't bleed on my vegetables. Alara chopped. Around her, the kitchen continued its controlled frenzy. She caught fragments of conversation between the crashes of pots and the hiss of steam. Heard he killed 12 men single-handed in the Battle of Greymarch. Cold as his father, they say, but twice as dangerous. Won't last a month before he sells the whole estate and goes back north. Alara kept her head down and her knife moving. The rosemary released its sharp, clean scent into the warm air. For a moment, she allowed herself to disappear into the rhythm of it, the steady thunk of the blade against wood, the pile of green growing under her hands. Elara. She looked up. One of the scullery maids, a girl named Pip, who couldn't have been more than 14, stood at her elbow, eyes wide. Mrs. Haverton wants you in the study. Elara's stomach dropped. Now? Right now. She set down the knife, wiped her hands on her apron, and followed Pip through the maze of corridors that connected the servants' areas to the main house. With each step, her mind raced through possibilities. Had she done something wrong? Had the Duke complained? Was she being dismissed? The study doors were heavy oak, dark with age. Pip knocked twice and fled before anyone answered. Enter. Elara pushed the door open. The study was warmer than the rest of the manor. A fire roared in the hearth, and afternoon light slanted through windows that overlooked the frozen gardens. The Duke sat behind a massive desk cluttered with papers, ledgers, and what looked like maps. He didn't look up when she entered. Close the door. She did. Sit. There was a chair across from the desk. Elara perched on its edge, hands folded in her lap. She could smell wood smoke and something else. Tobacco, maybe. The Duke was writing something, his hand moving in quick, efficient strokes across paper. Finally, he set down the pen and looked at her. You're 17. It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. And you've lived here your entire life? Yes, Your Grace. Doing what, exactly? Cleaning, Your Grace, laundry, whatever's needed. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with the same unsettling intensity he'd shown in the corridor. Can you read? The question caught her off guard. Yes, Your Grace. Right? Yes, Your Grace. How did you learn? She hesitated. The truth felt dangerous, but she'd never been good at lying. I taught myself, Your Grace, from newspapers and books I found. Books you found where? In the rubbish bins, Your Grace. Sometimes in rooms I was cleaning. Something that might have been amusement crossed his face. You stole books from my father's library. I always returned them, Your Grace. That's still theft. Yes, Your Grace. He pulled open a drawer and withdrew something, a small, leather-bound volume that looked ancient. He set it on the desk between them. What's this? Elara leaned forward slightly. The cover was unmarked, but she could see gilt edges on the pages. A book, Your Grace. Brilliant observation. What else? She studied it more carefully. The leather was old but well-maintained, the binding tight. An expensive one, Your Grace. Open it. She reached for it slowly, half expecting him to snatch it away. The pages inside were thick vellum, hand-lettered in a script she recognized as pre-printing press. Her breath caught. This is... She stopped, unsure if she was allowed to continue. Go on. It's a first edition Cervantes, Your Grace. Don Quixote. Spanish text, probably from the early 1600s. His eyebrows rose fractionally. You can read Spanish? No, Your Grace, but I recognize the printing style and the title page. She closed the book carefully and set it back on the desk. It's worth more than this entire manor, I'd imagine. Close. It's worth about half the manor. My father collected rare books. Did you know that? No, Your Grace. I'm going to ask you a question, and I want the truth. Do you understand? Elara's pulse quickened. Yes, Your Grace. How many servants are left in this household? She blinked. Whatever she'd been expecting, it wasn't that. I don't know the exact number, Your Grace. Estimate. She thought about it, tried to count faces in her mind. 23, Your Grace, maybe 25. This manor requires a staff of 60 to function properly. Did you know that? No, Your Grace. Well, now you do. He stood, walked to the window. Outside, the garden stretched toward a line of bare trees, black against gray sky. My father ran this estate into the ground, borrowed against it, bled it dry, let it rot while he sat in this room drinking himself to death. I've been gone 10 years, and in that time, Hulbrecht has become a joke. A cautionary tale about what happens to noble houses that forget how to govern. Elara said nothing. What could she say? I'm going to fix it, the Duke continued, still facing the window. But I can't do that with 23 servants trying to maintain a property this size. So I'm going to ask you another question, and again, I want the truth. He turned to face her. Do you want to stay here? The question hit her like a physical blow. Want had never been part of the equation. Wanting was a luxury for people who had choices. I, I don't have anywhere else to go, Your Grace. That's not what I asked. She met his eyes, dark brown, almost black in the firelight. There was something in them that frightened her, but she couldn't look away. Yes, she said quietly. I want to stay. Why? Because it's my home, Your Grace. He nodded once, as if she'd confirmed something he'd suspected. All right, then you're going to help me save it. Alara stared at him. Your Grace, I'm just a housemaid. Yes, I am aware. He returned to the desk, began sorting through papers. You're also someone who's lived here long enough to know where the problems are. I need eyes and ears in places where a duke can't go. Servants' quarters, kitchens. I need to know who's stealing, who's lazy, who's loyal. Can you do that? You want me to spy on the other servants? I want you to tell me the truth about what's happening in my household. There's a difference. They'll hate me. Probably. But you said you wanted to stay. This is the price. Alara's hands twisted in her lap. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to back away from this. Being noticed was dangerous. Being singled out was worse. But beneath the fear, something else stirred, something that felt almost like hunger. What do I get in return, Your Grace? His expression shifted. Surprise, then something that looked like respect. Bold question. You asked for honesty, Your Grace. Fair enough. He considered for a moment. You get a private room instead of sharing quarters. Better meals. And if you prove useful, I'll pay you double what you're making now. Alara was making nothing. She received room and board like all the servants. Doubling nothing was still nothing, but she didn't point that out. I accept, Your Grace. Good. Start tonight. I want a full report by week's end. He picked up his pen again, dismissing her. And Alara? She'd been halfway to the door. Your Grace? Don't get caught. I can't protect you if they decide to make your life hell. I understand, Your Grace. She left the study with her heart hammering and her mind racing. Behind her, she heard the scratch of pen on paper resume. Steady, relentless, the sound of a man who'd already moved on to the next problem. That night, Alara lay in the narrow cot she shared with two other housemaids, Pip and an older woman named Marjorie, who snored like a sawmill. The room was freezing despite the thin blankets, and she could see her breath in the darkness. A private room, better meals, actual wages. But at what cost? She thought about the servants she'd grown up with. Beatrice, who'd taught her which herbs could ease a headache. Thomas, the groundskeeper, who'd shown her how to identify edible plants in the forest. Even Mrs. Haverton, who was cruel but consistent. They would see this as betrayal, and maybe it was. But the Duke was right about one thing. Hulbrecht was dying. She'd watched it happen slowly, room by room, season by season. The peeling paint in the galleries, the missing tiles in the conservatory, the way the servants moved through their days with the defeated air of people who knew their work no longer mattered. If she could help change that. She turned over, pulling the blanket tighter. Beside her, Pip mumbled something in her sleep. Alara closed her eyes and tried to quiet the warring voices in her head. Tomorrow, she would start watching, listening, collecting the kind of information the Duke needed. Tomorrow, she would begin the transformation from invisible servant to something else entirely. She didn't yet know what that something was. But for the first time in her life, Alara Vance was about to become visible. And visibility, she would learn, was its own kind of danger. The first rule of survival, Alara had learned long ago, was to never be the most interesting thing in a room. The second rule was to never trust anyone who offered you something for nothing. She'd broken both rules in the span of an afternoon. 3 days after her meeting with the Duke, Alara stood in the servants' hall during the evening meal, a plate of cold stew in her hands, and felt the weight of 24 pairs of eyes on her back. The whispers had started that first night, low and vicious, spreading through the household like smoke under a door. Think she's warming his bed already? Give her a week. She'll be out on her arse like the rest. Always knew she was uppity, reading books like she's better than us. Alara kept her expression neutral and ate her stew. It was mostly water and turnips, but it was hot, and she'd learned not to complain about food. Across the table, Pip wouldn't meet her eyes. That hurt more than the whispers. Alara Vance, Mrs. Haverden's voice cut through the murmur like a knife through butter. The room went silent. Your Grace requires you in the blue drawing room, immediately. Alara set down her spoon. Around her, the silence transformed into something uglier, speculation mixed with satisfaction. Of course the Duke was calling for her. Of course she was being singled out again. She stood, smoothed her apron, and followed Mrs. Haverton out. The housekeeper didn't speak until they were alone in the corridor. I don't know what you did to catch His Grace's attention, girl, but mark my words, it won't end well for you. I haven't done anything, ma'am. That's what they all say. Mrs. Haverton's mouth was a thin line. When you fall, don't expect sympathy from me. I won't, ma'am. The blue drawing room was on the second floor, in a wing Alara had only ever entered to clean. Now as she stepped through the doorway, she saw it as guests would see it. The soaring ceiling painted with clouds, the enormous windows draped in velvet, the furniture that probably cost more than she'd earn in 10 lifetimes. The Duke stood by the fireplace, but he wasn't alone. A man Alara had never seen before occupied one of the chairs. Tall, fair-haired, dressed in the kind of clothes that whispered wealth rather than shouted it. He was younger than the Duke, maybe late 20s, with the kind of face that belonged in portraits, handsome in a way that made you forget to breathe. He was looking at her like she was something he'd found on the bottom of his boot. Ah, there she is, the Duke gestured toward Alara. Cedric, this is Alara Vance. Alara, Lord Cedric Thornvale. Alara dropped into a curtsy, keeping her eyes lowered. My lord. Charming, Thornvale drawled. The word dripped with contempt. Rowan, I thought you were joking. I rarely joke. The Duke's tone had gone cold. Alara, Lord Thornvale is my late father's chief advisor. He's been managing the duchy's affairs in my absence, managing them into bankruptcy, from what Alara had overheard in the kitchens, but she simply nodded. His lordship has concerns about some of the changes I'm implementing. I thought it might be useful for him to understand my reasoning. Thornvale's laugh was sharp and humorless. Your reasoning? You've been back less than a week and you're already turning the household upside down. Dismissing staff, reorganizing departments, and now, he gestured at Alara, elevating servants to positions they have no business occupying. I haven't elevated anyone. Yet. Then what is she doing here? The Duke moved to the sideboard, poured himself a drink. She's here because I asked her to be. Is that a problem? Everything about this is a problem, Rowan. You can't just waltz back after a decade and expect to understand the complexities of embezzlement? The Duke's voice was quiet, but it stopped Thornvale mid-sentence. Or perhaps the complexities of selling off duchy property without authorization? Should we discuss those complexities, Cedric? The temperature in this room dropped 10 degrees. Thornvale's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes, something dangerous. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. The Duke set down his glass. I've spent the past 3 days reviewing ledgers. 6 parcels of land sold in the last 2 years. Funds that should have gone to maintaining the estate instead disappeared into accounts I can't trace. And you, conveniently, were the only one with access to my father's seal. Your father authorized those sales. My father was barely coherent his last year. We both know that. The Duke's smile was sharp enough to cut. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to provide me with a complete accounting of every transaction made in the last 5 years. Every sale, every purchase, every payment. And you're going to do it by the end of the month. Thornvale stood slowly. And if I refuse, then I'll assume you have something to hide, and I'll turn the matter over to the Duchy Council. Let them investigate. For a long moment, neither man moved. Alara felt like she was watching 2 wolves circle each other, teeth bared. Finally, Thornvale smiled. It was a beautiful smile, empty and cold as winter. Of course, Your Grace, I live to serve. He turned that smile on Alara. And what role does she play in all this? Court jester? That's not your concern. Humor me. The Duke's expression was unreadable. Miss Vance has proven herself observant and trustworthy, 2 qualities in short supply around here. Trustworthy. Thornvale repeated the word like he was tasting poison. How delightful. Well then, Miss Vance, I look forward to our future interactions. The way he said it made Alara's skin crawl. She dropped another curtsy, keeping her eyes down. Thornvale swept from the room, leaving a wake of expensive cologne and barely contained rage. The Duke waited until his footsteps had faded before speaking. "You can stop pretending to be meek now. He's gone." Alara straightened. "Was that necessary, Your Grace? Bringing me here for that?" "Yes." The Duke returned to his drink. "Cedric needed to understand that I'm serious about changing how things work. Having you present drove that point home. I'm not a weapon, Your Grace." "No, but you're a symbol. And symbols matter." He looked at her over the rim of his glass. "You're angry." "I'm concerned, Your Grace. You just painted a target on my back." "Welcome to politics, Ilara. Everyone has a target on their back. The trick is making sure it's smaller than everyone else's." "That's not reassuring." "It wasn't meant to be." He set down the glass. "Did you compile the information I asked for?" She had. 3 days of watching, listening, cataloging. She'd filled 4 pages in careful handwriting, documenting everything from Thomas the groundskeeper's drinking problem to the fact that someone had been stealing silverware from the dining room. She withdrew the folded papers from her apron pocket and handed them over. The Duke read in silence, his expression growing darker with each page. "Half the kitchen staff is stealing food. They're hungry, Your Grace. The portions have been cut twice in the last 6 months. And whose decision was that?" "Mrs. Haverton said Lord Thornvale ordered it, said the household needed to reduce expenses." The Duke's jaw tightened. "Of course he did. What about the silverware?" "I don't know for certain, Your Grace, but I've seen Peter, one of the footmen, polishing pieces that should be locked in the vault." "How do you know what should be in the vault?" Alara hesitated. "I used to help catalog it when I was younger, before the old Duke stopped caring about inventory." "You have a good memory." "I remember things that matter, Your Grace." He folded the papers and tucked them into his jacket. "This is excellent work, exactly what I needed." "What will you do with it?" "Solve problems." He moved toward the door, then paused. "There's something else. I want you to attend the Winter Council meeting next week." Alara stared at him. "Your Grace, that's impossible. Servants don't—" "I'm not asking you to attend as a servant. You'll be there as my secretary." The word hung in the air between them like something fragile and impossible. "Your Grace, I can't. Can you write quickly?" "Yes, but can you keep your mouth shut about what you hear?" "Yes, but—" "Then you can do this." He opened the door. "Report to my study tomorrow morning at 8. We have a lot of work to do." He was gone before she could protest further. Alara stood alone in the blue drawing room, her heart hammering, her mind racing. Secretary. The Duke's secretary. It was insane, impossible, and yet she wanted it. The realization hit her like cold water. She wanted to be more than a ghost moving through the manor's corridors. She wanted to matter, even if it destroyed her. "Mom." The next morning, Alara appeared at the Duke's study at 8 sharp, wearing the cleanest dress she owned. It was still a servant's dress, plain gray wool, patched at the elbows, but it was the best she had. The Duke looked up from his desk when she entered. "You'll need better clothes." "Your Grace, I don't—" "There's a dressmaker in town. I'll send word." He gestured to a chair that had been pulled up beside the desk. "Sit. We're going to go through every document related to duchy finances for the past 5 years. I need you to make notes on anything that looks questionable." "I don't know what questionable looks like, Your Grace." "You're smart. You'll figure it out." He handed her a ledger. "Start with this. It's from 3 years ago." The numbers swam before her eyes at first, columns of figures that meant nothing. But slowly, patterns began to emerge. Regular payments to a company called Thornvale Holdings, large sums transferred on dates that coincided with land sales. "Your Grace?" "What's Thornvale Holdings?" He looked up sharply. "Where did you see that?" She pointed to an entry. "Here and here and here. Regular payments, 2,000 gold each time." The Duke's expression went cold. "Thornvale Holdings is Cedric's personal investment company." "So he was paying himself?" "Apparently." He stood, began pacing. "The bastard wasn't even subtle about it. He must have assumed I'd never come back." Alara watched him move, back and forth, like something caged. "What will you do?" "Confront him, but carefully. Cedric has allies in the council. If I accuse him without proof, You have proof. It's in the ledger. It's not enough. I need to show pattern, intent. I need documentation that proves he knew these payments were unauthorized. He stopped pacing. Keep reading. Flag anything else connected to Thornvale Holdings. They worked through lunch, then through dinner. By the time darkness fell outside, Ilara had filled 6 pages with notes and her hand was cramping. The Duke had grown quieter as the hours passed, his anger crystallizing into something harder. Your Grace? She set down her pen. May I ask a question? Go ahead. Why did you stay away so long? He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was tired. Because I was angry at my father, at this place, at the expectations. So I left. Joined the military, fought in wars that didn't matter, convinced myself I was making a difference. He looked at the papers scattered across his desk. I was a coward. You're here now, only because my father died. If he were still alive, I'd probably still be in the north, pretending I didn't have responsibilities. Ilara thought about that, about the luxury of running away, of having somewhere else to go. She'd never had that option. For what it's worth, Your Grace, I think the duchy needs you. He met her eyes. And what do you need, Ilara? The question caught her off guard. Need, want. She'd spent so long denying both that she barely recognized them anymore. I need to not be invisible, she said quietly. Then we're aligned. He gathered the papers. Go get some rest. Tomorrow we start preparing for the council meeting. Ilara stood, her legs stiff from sitting. At the door she paused. Your Grace, thank you. For what? For seeing me. His expression softened fractionally. Go, before I change my mind and put you back on your knees scrubbing floors. She left, but the words stayed with her. For seeing me. Such a small thing. Such an enormous thing. The next week blurred into a rhythm of work that consumed her completely. Mornings in the study, poring over documents, afternoons learning the protocols of council meetings, how to take notes, how to sit quietly and record everything without inserting herself into the proceedings. Evenings alone in the small room the Duke had given her, a real room, with a door that locked and a window that looked out over the gardens. The other servants stopped speaking to her entirely. She'd become something other, something suspect. When she passed in the corridors, conversations died. When she entered the dining hall, seats emptied around her. Only Beatrice still acknowledged her existence, and even that was complicated. You're playing a dangerous game, girl, the cook said one afternoon when Ilara came to the kitchens looking for tea. His Grace won't protect you forever. I'm not asking for protection. Then you're a fool. Beatrice poured hot water over tea leaves. You know what they're saying about you? I can imagine. They're saying you're using him, that you've got ambitions above your station. Ilara accepted the tea, wrapped her cold hands around the cup. Maybe I do. Beatrice's eyes widened. You're serious. Why shouldn't I be? I'm good at this work. Better than half the people who were born into it. Bussy, because you're a servant, Ilara. That doesn't change just because the Duke gives you a desk and some fancy papers to read. Maybe it should. Beatrice shook her head slowly. You've changed. Is that so terrible? It is when it gets you killed. The words sent a chill down Ilara's spine, but she didn't let it show. I'll be careful. Careful won't be enough, not with Thornvale. What do you mean? Beatrice glanced toward the kitchen door, lowered her voice. My sister works at his estate. She says he's been having meetings, late-night visitors, men from the council. Planning what? I don't know, but whatever it is, you're in the middle of it whether you want to be or not. Ilara sipped her tea, thought about Thornvale's cold smile. I know. Then be smart, and watch your back. The Winter Council convened on a Tuesday morning in the Great Hall, a cavernous room with vaulted ceilings and tapestries that depicted battles Ilara had only read about in stolen books. She entered behind the Duke, carrying a leather case full of documents, and felt every eye in the room turn toward her. There were 12 council members, all men, all wealthy. They sat at a long table that dominated the center of the room. Thornvale occupied the seat at the far end, his expression pleasant and empty. Gentlemen, the Duke said, taking his seat at the head of the table, thank you for coming. We serve at your Grace's pleasure, one of the councilmen, A heavy-set man with a gray beard said formally. His eyes kept drifting to Alara. Though, I must say, I wasn't aware we'd have guests. Miss Vance is my secretary. She'll be recording the proceedings. The murmurs that rippled around the table were not friendly. Thornvale's smile widened fractionally. Your Grace, surely one of the professional scribes would be more appropriate. Miss Vance is perfectly capable. Shall we begin? The Duke launched into an overview of the duchy's financial situation, or rather, the disaster that passed for financial management. He laid out the unauthorized land sales, the missing funds, the pattern of payments to Thornvale Holdings. Alara wrote everything down, her hand moving quickly across the page. She could feel the tension building in the room, could see the way the councilman's expression shifted from confusion to shock to anger. Thornvale, for his part, remained calm. When the Duke finished, he spread his hands in a gesture of openness. Your Grace, I appreciate your thoroughness, but I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. Those land sales were authorized by your father. My father was incompetent the last 2 years of his life. You knew that. I knew he was ill. I also knew the duchy needed income. I did what I thought was necessary to keep us solvent. By funneling money to your own company? Those were consulting fees, perfectly legal. Except you never consulted anyone. You simply took the money. Thornvale's smile finally cracked. Careful, Your Grace. These are serious accusations. Then perhaps you'd care to explain these. The Duke nodded to Alara. She stood, pulled a sheaf of papers from the case, and distributed copies around the table. Her hands shook slightly, but she kept her expression neutral. The document showed the pattern: payments, transfers, sales, all traced back to Thornvale. The gray-bearded councilman, Lord Ashford, Alara remembered, studied the papers with narrowing eyes. Cedric, is this true? It's a misrepresentation. It's documentation, the Duke cut in, from the duchy's own ledgers, unless you're suggesting Miss Vance and I forged them. The room erupted. Voices overlapped, some angry, some shocked, some clearly trying to defend Thornvale. Alara retreated to her chair, her heart pounding. Then Thornvale stood. The room quieted. Your Grace, he said softly, you've been away a long time. Perhaps that's clouded your judgment, but making accusations in front of the council based on the work of a— He looked directly at Alara. Servant who can barely read? Well, it reflects poorly on you. The insult landed like a slap. Around the table, several councilmen nodded. Alara felt heat crawl up her neck. She opened her mouth to respond, but the Duke was faster. Miss Vance reads better than half this council. She also has more integrity than you've shown in the past 5 years. He turned to the gathered lords. I'm calling for a formal investigation into Lord Thornvale's activities. All in favor? Hands went up slowly. 6 out of 12. Not enough for a majority, but enough to force action. Thornvale's expression had gone very still. This isn't over. No, the Duke agreed. It isn't. The investigation begins immediately. You'll surrender all relevant documents by week's end. And if I refuse? Then you'll be removed from the council pending criminal charges. The threat hung in the air. Thornvale's eyes swept the room, calculating, then landed on Alara. What she saw there made her blood run cold. As you wish, Your Grace. He bowed shallowly. I look forward to proving my innocence. He left without another word. Several councilmen followed him. Lord Ashford remained, studying the Duke with shrewd eyes. You've made an enemy today, Rowan. I made that enemy 10 years ago when I was born. True, but now you've given him a target. Ashford glanced at Alara. I hope she's worth it. She is. After the councilman departed, Alara and the Duke remained alone in the great hall. She gathered the papers with trembling hands. Your Grace, you did well. I didn't do anything. You stood there while a lord insulted you and didn't flinch. That's something. He rubbed his eyes tiredly. Though I should have anticipated that attack. He meant it, Alara said quietly, about me barely being able to read. He was trying to undermine my credibility through you. Classic political maneuvering. It worked. Half the room believed him. Half the room is terrified of change. The Duke looked at her. Are you having second thoughts? Alara thought about returning to the kitchens, to scrubbing floors, to being invisible. The idea made her feel physically ill. No, Your Grace. Good, because this is about to get much worse before it gets better. He had no idea how right he was. That night, Ilara returned to her room to find the door ajar. She pushed it open slowly. Everything had been destroyed. Her mattress gutted, straw scattered across the floor. Her few possessions, a comb, a spare dress, the book she'd been reading torn to pieces. And on the wall, written in what looked like ash, "Know your place." She stood in the doorway, staring at the devastation, and felt something inside her shift. Not fear, not anymore. Rage. She turned and walked back down the corridor, back to the Duke's study. He was still there, reading by candlelight. He looked up when she entered. "Ilara?" "They destroyed my room." His expression went hard. "Who?" "I don't know, but I'm not stopping. I'm not backing down. I'm not going back to being invisible." Her voice was shaking, but not with fear. "So whatever comes next, I'm ready." The Duke studied her for a long moment. Then he stood and pulled a key from his pocket. "There's a suite in the East Wing. It was my mother's. No one's used it in 15 years. He held out the key. "It's yours now." Ilara stared at the key, at this small piece of metal that represented everything impossible. "Your Grace, I can't—" "You can, and you will. Because Cedric Thornvale just declared war, and I'll be damned if I let him win." She took the key. Her fingers closed around it, and she knew, truly knew, there was no going back. The servant girl who'd spent 17 years on her knees was gone. What stood in her place was something new, something dangerous, something that refused to disappear. Something that refused to disappear. The East Wing suite smelled like dust and old perfume. Ilara stood in the doorway holding a single candle, watching shadows dance across furniture draped in white sheets like ghosts waiting to be remembered. The Duke had left her at the entrance with the key and a warning, "Lock your door at night," before disappearing back down the corridor. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The lock clicked with a weight that felt like finality. The sitting room was larger than the servants' quarters where 20 people slept. A bedroom lay beyond, and through another door she glimpsed a bathing room with an actual porcelain tub. Ilara set down her candle and pulled the sheet off the nearest chair. Dust billowed up, making her cough. Beneath the cloth, the furniture was beautiful. Dark wood carved with intricate patterns. Velvet cushions faded to the color of old roses. She moved through the rooms, pulling off sheets, revealing a life someone had lived and left behind. On the vanity in the bedroom sat a hairbrush with silver backing, strands of dark hair still caught in the bristles. A book lay open on the nightstand as if the reader had just stepped away. The Duke's mother, dead 15 years, and no one had touched her things. Ilara picked up the book, poetry, in a language she didn't recognize. She set it down carefully and walked to the window. Below, the frozen garden stretched toward the forest, black tree branches scratching at a gray sky. In the distance, she could see lights from the village. From up here, the world looked small and manageable. She knew better. A knock startled her. Her hand went instinctively to the fire poker before she recognized the pattern. 2 quick raps, a pause, then one more. The Duke's signal. She opened the door. He stood there holding a tray. "You haven't eaten." "I'm not hungry, Your Grace." "Liar." He pushed past her into the room, set the tray on a table she'd just uncovered. "Beatrice sent soup and bread, and she made me promise you'd eat it all." Despite everything, Ilara felt her throat tighten. "She's still speaking to me?" "Beatrice speaks to everyone. It's her gift and her curse." He glanced around the room, his eyes lingering on the uncovered furniture. "I should have had this cleaned first." "It's fine. It's a disaster, but it's yours now." He turned to face her fully. "We need to talk about what happens next." Ilara sat in one of the chairs, suddenly exhausted. "Let me guess. Thornvale's going to come after me." "Not directly. He's too smart for that. But he'll work to discredit you, undermine you, make you look like exactly what he said. A servant with delusions of grandeur." The Duke remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back. "The investigation I called for will take weeks. During that time, he'll be gathering allies, building his defense, and turning the council against us." "Against you, you mean?" "No, against us. You're part of this now, whether you like it or not." Ilara looked at the soup, steam still rising from the bowl. The smell of herbs and chicken made her stomach growl despite her claimed lack of hunger. I could leave. Go somewhere else. That would solve your problem. Is that what you want? The question hung in the air between them. What did she want? A week ago, she would have said survival, safety. Now those words felt hollow, like coins that had lost their value. No, she said finally. I want to finish what we started, even if it destroys you. I've been destroyed before, Your Grace. I'm still here. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or respect. Then we move forward, but carefully. Thornvale is dangerous when cornered. What about the council? You only got 6 votes. I'll work on the others. Some can be reasoned with, some can be bought, and some, he smiled without humor, will switch sides the moment they sense which way the wind's blowing. That's cynical. That's politics. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. There's one more thing. I'm hosting a formal dinner in 3 days. All the council members plus select nobility from the region. You'll attend. Alara's stomach dropped. Your Grace, I can't. You can and you will, as my guest, not as staff. I don't have clothes for something like that. I don't know the protocols, the proper way to... You'll learn. The dressmaker arrives tomorrow morning. He opened the door. Get some rest, Ilara. The real fight starts now. He left her alone with the soup and her racing thoughts. She ate mechanically, tasting nothing, her mind already spinning through scenarios. A formal dinner, nobility, people who would see through her in seconds. She was still sitting there an hour later when another knock came, softer this time, hesitant. Who is it? Pip, miss. Ilara opened the door. The young scullery maid stood in the corridor, eyes wide, clutching something wrapped in cloth. I brought you this from the kitchens, thought you might want it. She held out the bundle. Inside was a small cake, still warm. Beatrice made extra, said you always liked her honey cakes. The simple kindness of it nearly broke Ilara. Thank you. Miss Ilara? Pip's voice dropped to a whisper. Is it true? What they're saying? That you're living up here now? It's true. And you're really going to the dinner? With all the lords and ladies? Apparently. Pip's expression was complicated. Part awe, part fear. Part something that looked like loss. You're different now. Not like us anymore. I'm still me, Pip. No, miss, you're not. She backed away. But I hope you're happy. Whatever happens. She fled before Ilara could respond. The dressmaker was a tiny woman named Margot, who spoke in rapid French-accented bursts and had opinions about everything. She arrived at dawn with 2 assistants and enough fabric to clothe a small army. Turn, she commanded, circling Ilara like a predator. Again, stop, shoulders back. Mon Dieu, you stand like a beaten dog. I was a servant. You were. Past tense. Now you are, what? His Grace's secretary? His companion? Margot's eyes were sharp as needles. Or something else entirely. Heat crept up Ilara's neck. His secretary. And secretaries attend formal dinners in the duchy's finest rooms? Interesting. Margot snapped her fingers at one of her assistants. The blue silk and the dark green velvet. Bring both. The next 2 hours were a blur of measuring, pinning, and being poked with needles while Margot muttered in French. The assistants draped fabric over Ilara's frame, adjusted and readjusted, their hands impersonal and efficient. Finally, Margot stepped back, hands on hips. You have good bones, strong features, not classically beautiful but striking. We work with this. She gestured at the mirror. Ilara barely recognized herself in the blue silk gown that skimmed her frame. The color brought out her eyes, gray-green, like storm water. The neckline was lower than anything she'd ever worn, showing collarbones she hadn't known she possessed. I look like someone who belongs in that dining room. That is the point, no? Margot began unpinning the dress with quick, practiced movements. 3 more will be ready by tomorrow. For now, we practice. Practice what? Walking? Sitting? Moving in these clothes without falling on your face like a drunk sailor? For the next hour, Margot drilled her mercilessly. How to manage a long skirt on stairs without tripping. How to sit without crushing the fabric or sprawling ungracefully. How to hold a wine glass by the stem, never the bowl. which fork to use for what course, how to laugh delicately instead of the full-throated sound that came naturally. "And if someone insults you?" Margot asked. "I smile and ignore it? Wrong. You smile and return it, but with such elegance they don't realize they've been cut until later." She demonstrated a pleasant expression, a tilt of the head, words that dripped poison disguised as honey. "Try." Alara practiced until her face hurt from fake smiling. By the time Margot left, she felt like she'd been through combat training. "Remember," the dressmaker said at the door, gathering her supplies, "confidence is half the battle. The other half is making them forget you were ever beneath them. Fake both until they become real." Alara spent the afternoon in the Duke's study, poring over documents related to Thornvale's financial dealings. The pattern was clear. He'd been systematically bleeding the duchy dry for years, funneling money through shell companies and fake contracts. The question was how to prove it in a way the council couldn't ignore. "We need testimony," the Duke said, staring at the papers spread across his desk. "Someone who worked directly with Cedric, someone who saw the transactions happen. Everyone who worked that closely with him is either loyal or terrified. Then we need to make them more terrified of what happens if they don't talk." He rubbed his eyes, and for the first time Alara noticed how tired he looked, how the lines around his mouth had deepened. "There's a clerk, Edmund Pierce. He handled most of the paperwork for the land sales. If we can get him to testify," "He won't. Thornvale probably owns him. Everyone has a price. We just need to find his." A knock interrupted them. One of the footmen, Peter, the one Alara had noted in her reports as possibly stealing, stood in the doorway looking nervous. "Your Grace, Lord Thornvale is here. He requests an audience." The Duke's expression went cold. "Show him in." Alara started to stand, but he gestured for her to stay. "You're part of this conversation." Thornvale entered looking immaculate as always, perfectly tailored clothes, hair styled just so, that pleasant empty smile fixed in place. His eyes swept the room, landing on Alara with the briefest flicker of contempt before returning to the Duke. "Your Grace, thank you for seeing me. Did I have a choice?" "Of course, I simply hoped we could discuss recent misunderstandings in private." He glanced meaningfully at Alara. "Anything you have to say, you can say in front of Miss Vance." Thornvale's smile tightened fractionally. "Very well. I came to apologize." The silence that followed was absolute. The Duke leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Apologize. For my behavior at the council meeting. It was inappropriate to question Miss Vance's abilities in such a public forum." He turned to Alara, executed a small bow. "My sincerest apologies, Miss Vance. I was defending myself poorly, and you became an unfortunate target." The words were perfect. The delivery was flawless, and Alara didn't believe a single syllable. "Apology accepted, my lord," she heard herself say. "Excellent." Thornvale returned his attention to the Duke. "I also wanted to assure you that I'm cooperating fully with the investigation. I've already begun compiling the requested documents." "How thorough of you." "I serve at your Grace's pleasure." A pause. "I also wanted to extend an invitation. I'm hosting a small gathering at my estate tomorrow evening. Nothing formal, just drinks and conversation. I hoped you might attend. Both of you." The Duke's eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because despite our differences, Rowan, we need to find a way to work together. This duchy can't function if we're at each other's throats." He spread his hands in a gesture of openness. "Consider it an olive branch." "Or a trap?" Thornvale laughed, a rich, warm sound completely devoid of genuine humor. "If I wanted to trap you, I'd be far more subtle. This is simply an attempt at reconciliation. Accept or don't. The choice is yours." After Thornvale left, Alara turned to the Duke. "You're not actually considering this." "I'm absolutely considering it. Your Grace, it's obviously a trap? Probably, but it's also an opportunity." He stood, began pacing the length of the study. "Cedric wouldn't invite us unless he felt confident. That means he has something planned. I want to know what." "So we walk straight into whatever ambush he's prepared?" "No, we walk in prepared for an ambush. There's a difference." He stopped, looked at her directly. "You don't have to come. If you're going, I'm going. Alara, We're in this together. You said so yourself. He studied her for a long moment, and she refused to look away. Finally, he nodded. Wear the green dress, and keep your eyes open. But the next evening arrived too quickly. Alara stood in her borrowed room wearing the green velvet gown that Margot had delivered that morning, staring at her reflection and barely recognizing the woman looking back. The dress transformed her, made her look elegant, dignified, like someone who belonged in places she'd only ever cleaned. The illusion was perfect and completely false. A knock. The Duke, dressed in formal evening wear that made him look every inch the military commander he'd been. Ready? No. Good. Neither am I. He offered his arm. Let's go anyway. Thornvale's estate sat at the edge of the duchy, a sprawling manor that made Halbrecht look modest by comparison. Alara stepped out of the carriage in her green velvet gown, her stomach churning with nerves, and looked up at windows blazing with light. Breathe, the Duke said quietly beside her, and remember, you belong here. She didn't, but she straightened her spine, placed her hand on his arm, and followed him inside anyway. The gathering was small as promised, perhaps 20 guests scattered throughout a drawing room decorated in shades of gold and cream. Servants circulated with drinks on silver trays. Soft music played from somewhere Alara couldn't see. A string quartet hidden behind a screen. Everyone was dressed in the kind of casual elegance that costs more than most people earned in a year. Conversations died as they entered. Eyes tracked their movement across the room like predators watching prey. Thornvale materialized from the crowd, a glass of wine in each hand. Rowan and Miss Vance, I'm delighted you came. He handed them the glasses with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Please, make yourselves comfortable. Dinner will be served shortly. The Duke accepted the wine but didn't drink. Alara followed his lead, holding the glass like a prop. For the next hour, they circulated. The Duke spoke with council members and local nobility while Alara stood at his side, acutely aware of the weight of every glance, every whispered comment. She caught fragments as they moved through the room. Audacity, showing up here with her. Heard she was a scullery maid. Playing at being gentry, how amusing. She kept her expression neutral and her mouth shut. Margot's voice echoed in her head. Confidence. Make them forget. An older woman with diamonds dripping from her neck approached. Miss Vance, isn't it? How fascinating to meet you. Tell me, where is your family from? I don't have family, my lady. Oh, how unfortunate. And your education, where did you study? I'm self-taught, my lady. How industrious. The woman's smile was sharp as broken glass. Well, I'm sure His Grace appreciates your unique qualifications. The Duke's hand found the small of Alara's back, a warning, or perhaps support. Lady Ashworth, if you'll excuse us. They moved on, but the encounters continued. Each one a small battle, each question a trap disguised as politeness. Dinner was served in a dining room with a table long enough to seat 40. Crystal chandeliers blazed overhead. The plates were gold-rimmed porcelain. Alara found herself placed between a portly lord who ignored her completely and a young woman who introduced herself as Lady Helena Marchmont. So, Helena said, her voice bright with false friendliness, how exactly did you come to work for His Grace? I've served the Halbrecht household all my life, my lady. How fascinating. And now you're his secretary, was it? Yes, my lady. Such an unusual arrangement, but then the Duke has always been rather unconventional. Helena took a delicate sip of wine, her eyes never leaving Ilara's face. Tell me, do you find the work terribly difficult? All those numbers and documents? It must be overwhelming for someone without proper education. The insult was wrapped in silk, but it was still an insult. Alara met Helena's eyes and remembered Margot's lesson. I manage, my lady. Fortunately, the work requires intelligence rather than breeding. One can't inherit competence. Helena's smile froze. Across the table, someone laughed, quickly stifled. The portly lord beside Alara suddenly seemed to find his soup fascinating. The rest of the dinner passed in a haze of courses Alara could barely taste. Soup, fish, fowl, beef, dessert, each one more elaborate than the last. She watched the Duke navigate conversation with practiced ease, deflecting questions about the investigation, parrying verbal jabs with the skill of someone trained in actual combat. Then dessert arrived, and Thornvale stood. Friends, thank you for joining me this evening. I know tensions have been running high lately, so I thought this gathering might help us all remember that we're on the same side, the duchy's side. He raised his glass. To unity. To unity, the guests echoed dutifully. There's one more reason I invited you all here tonight. Thornvale's smile widened. I have an announcement. After much consideration, I've decided to step back from my advisory role to focus on my own estates, effective immediately. Murmurs rippled around the table. The Duke's expression didn't change, but Alara felt him tense beside her. Furthermore, Thornvale continued, I've compiled a complete accounting of all duchy finances during my tenure. These documents will be delivered to His Grace tomorrow morning, along with my resignation from the council. The murmurs grew louder. This was unexpected. I know some have questioned my loyalty to the duchy, so I'm removing any doubt. His Grace will have full transparency and I'll retire to private life. Thornvale looked directly at the Duke, his expression benevolent. I hope this demonstrates my commitment to your success, Rowan. The Duke stood slowly. This is unexpected, Cedric. I serve the duchy. If my presence has become a distraction, then I remove myself. He raised his glass again. To new beginnings. The toast was drunk. Conversations resumed, now tinged with excitement and speculation. But Alara felt something wrong coiling in her gut like spoiled food. He's lying, she whispered to the Duke when Thornvale had moved away. Obviously. The question is why? They found out an hour later. The party had moved back to the drawing room. Alara stood near a window, trying to remain invisible while catching her breath, when she overheard two men talking nearby. They stood with their backs to her, unaware of her presence. Brilliant move, really. Cedric steps aside, looks magnanimous, and meanwhile, investigation will find nothing because he's already moved the money. 3 shell companies in Valsara. Untouchable. By the time they figure it out, he'll be long gone. And the girl? What about her? Cedric says she's the real target. Get rid of her, and Rowan loses his evidence and his credibility. 2 birds, 1 stone. Alara's blood ran cold. She turned slowly, trying to see the speakers' faces, but before she could, Thornvale appeared at her elbow. Miss Vance, are you enjoying yourself? She forced her expression to remain calm. Very much, my lord. I'm glad. Though I imagine this is all rather new for you, these sorts of gatherings. His smile was kind. His eyes were not. Tell me, have you given thought to your future? My future, my lord? Once this unpleasantness with the investigation is over, assuming, of course, that His Grace's interest in you remains. He leaned closer, and she could smell his cologne, expensive, cloying. Men of his station rarely maintain attachments to those so far beneath them. I'd hate to see you left with nothing when his attention inevitably wanes. The words were poison wrapped in concern. Alara forced herself to smile, to channel every lesson Margot had taught her. I appreciate your concern, my lord, but I'm quite capable of managing my own future. Are you? He studied her like something under glass. You know, there's a story my grandmother used to tell about a sparrow who befriended a hawk. The sparrow thought it had transcended its nature through proximity to power, but in the end, nature reasserted itself. The hawk grew hungry. His smile widened, and sparrows are so very fragile. Before Alara could respond, the Duke appeared beside her, his presence like a shield. Cedric, we're leaving. So soon. The evening's just begun. We have an early morning. The Duke's hand found the small of Alara's back, a gesture of protection and possession that didn't go unnoticed by the watching guests. Thank you for your hospitality. They made their excuses and left. In the carriage, neither spoke until the estate's lights had disappeared behind them. He's moved the money, Alara said, her voice tight. I heard 2 men talking, 3 shell companies in Valsara. The Duke's jaw tightened in the dim light. Of course he has. The resignation, the transparency, it's all theater. By the time we finish the investigation, there won't be anything to find. So he wins. Not yet. His eyes were hard in the darkness. But we're going to need something bigger than documents. We need leverage. Like what? I don't know yet. But Cedric made a mistake tonight. He showed his hand too early. That means he's worried about something. They arrived back at Halbrecht Manor near midnight. Alara went straight to her room, exhausted and frustrated. Her head ached from the wine she'd barely touched, from the constant vigilance, from the weight of pretending to be someone she wasn't. She was unlacing her dress when she heard the sound, soft footsteps in the corridor outside. She froze, fingers still on the laces. The footsteps paused at her door. A shadow blocked the light from under the doorframe. Alara's heart hammered so loudly, she was certain whoever stood outside could hear it. Then a piece of paper slid beneath the door. Alara waited, hardly breathing, until the footsteps retreated down the corridor. Only when she was certain they were gone did she pick up the paper with shaking hands. The message was brief, written in careful script that she didn't recognize. The proof you seek is in the East Tower. 3rd floor, behind the green panel. Come alone at midnight tomorrow. Tell no one. This is your only chance. No signature. No indication of who sent it. Alara read it 3 times, her mind racing. It was obviously a trap. It had to be. But what if it wasn't? What if someone, a clerk, a servant, someone with access to Thornvale's secrets, was trying to help? She should show this to the Duke immediately. But the note said, come alone, tell no one. If she told the Duke, whoever sent this might disappear. The opportunity might be lost. But if she went alone and it was a trap? She thought about the conversation she'd overheard. The girl's the real target. Get rid of her, and Rowan loses his evidence and his credibility. This could be exactly what they'd meant. Alara stood in her borrowed room wearing a borrowed dress, holding a piece of paper that could either save them or destroy her completely, and realized she'd reached a point of no return. She could play it safe, show the Duke, let him investigate, or she could take the risk, go alone, prove she was more than just a symbol or a liability. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, at the woman in green velvet who looked like she belonged in dining rooms full of nobility, at the girl underneath who'd spent her life scrubbing floors and being invisible. Tomorrow night, she would go to the East Tower. Tomorrow night, she would discover whether courage and desperation were enough to outweigh fear. Tomorrow night, everything would change. She locked the door, hid the note under her mattress, and tried to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. Instead, she lay in the darkness, listening to the old manor creak and settle around her, and thought about sparrows and hawks, about fragile things that refused to stay broken, about the distance between invisibility and death, and whether there was any difference at all. The clock in the corridor struck 1, then 2. Alara stared at the ceiling and waited for tomorrow, her mind spinning through scenarios. What would she find in the East Tower? Who had sent the note? What proof could possibly be hidden there that Thornvale hadn't already destroyed or moved? And if it was a trap, if they were waiting for her, what then? She had no weapons, no training, no protection except her wits and her determination not to be erased again. It would have to be enough. When dawn finally came, gray and cold through her window, she rose and dressed with hands that barely shook. She looked at herself in the mirror, no longer a servant, not yet anything else, and made a choice. She would go to the East Tower. She would face whatever waited there. And she would not tell the Duke. The decision settled over her like armor made of paper, fragile, temporary, but hers alone. By the time she went down to breakfast, she'd perfected the lie. By the time evening fell, she'd almost convinced herself she could survive it. Almost. At 11:30 that night, Alara stood at the base of the East Tower with a single candle and a pounding heart, looking up at windows dark as empty eyes. The tower was old, older than the rest of the manor, built from stone that had weathered centuries of storms. It stood apart from the main building, connected by a covered walkway that had seen better days. She thought about Pip's words, "You're different now, not like us anymore." She thought about Thornvale's smile. Sparrows are so very fragile. She thought about the Duke's warning, "Lock your door at night." Then she pushed open the tower door and stepped inside. The stairwell spiraled upward into darkness. Her candle threw dancing shadows on the stone walls. Each step creaked under her weight. The air smelled like mold and abandonment. 1st floor, 2nd floor. The silence was absolute except for her footsteps and her breathing. 3rd floor. The landing was small, barely 6 feet across. 2 doors faced her. One rotted wood that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. The other newer, reinforced with iron bands. Neither was green. Alara turned slowly, examining the walls. "Behind you," she thought. The message said behind the green panel, not through it. There, A section of wall painted a faded green, so old the color had nearly disappeared into gray. She pressed against it. Nothing. Pushed harder. Still nothing. Then she noticed the slight gap along one edge. She wedged her fingers into the space and pulled. The panel swung outward with a groan of protest, revealing a narrow opening beyond. Alara held up her candle and peered inside. A small room, no bigger than a closet, and inside, scattered across a rough table, were papers. Dozens of them. Ledgers. Contracts, letters. Her heart began to race. She stepped inside, set her candle down, and began to read. The documents were damning. Transfer orders in Thornvale's handwriting, receipts for payments made under false names, a letter to someone in Valsara detailing how to hide assets across multiple shell companies. This was it. This was the proof they needed. "I was wondering when you'd arrive." The voice came from behind her. Alara spun around. Thornvale stood in the doorway, blocking her only exit. He wasn't alone. Two men flanked him, large, rough-looking, not nobility, hired muscle. "You're more predictable than I expected," he continued, stepping into the small room. "Though I'll admit I had doubts. I thought perhaps the Duke would have trained you better." "He doesn't know I'm here." "Oh, I know. That's what makes this so convenient." Thornvale picked up one of the documents, examined it. "These are very good forgeries, by the way. I had them made specifically for tonight. They won't stand up to real scrutiny, of course, but they don't need to. They just need to be found on your body." The words hit her like ice water. My body. Did you really think I'd leave actual evidence lying around, after going to such lengths to hide it? His smile was patient, like he was explaining something to a slow child. "No, Ilara, this was always about removing you from the board. The Duke's pet project, his noble cause. Once you're gone, his credibility dies with you. And a tragic accident in the old tower, a servant girl who got in over her head. Well, that's just unfortunate, isn't it?" Alara's mind raced. The window behind her was too small to climb through. The doorway was blocked. She had no weapons except the candle in her hand. "The Duke will know you did this." "Will he? Or will he simply mourn the loss of someone who reached too high and fell?" Thornvale gestured to his companions. "Gentlemen, make it look like she fell down the stairs. Nothing too obvious." The men moved forward, and Alara threw the candle directly at the papers on the table. The flame caught immediately. Dry parchment, old ink. It went up like kindling. Thornvale shouted, lunged for the documents, and in that moment of chaos, Alara dove past him through the doorway. She hit the landing hard, scrambled to her feet, and ran for the stairs. Behind her, she heard cursing, the sound of boots on stone, Thornvale's voice shouting orders. She took the stairs two at a time, her dress tangling around her legs, threatening to trip her with every step. Second floor. First floor. Almost there. A hand grabbed her shoulder, yanked her backward. Alara screamed and lashed out, her elbow connecting with something soft. The grip loosened. She wrenched free and burst through the tower door into the night. The covered walkway stretched before her. She ran. "Stop her!" Thornvale's voice furious now. "Don't let her reach the manor!" Footsteps thundered behind her. Alara's lungs burned. Her legs felt like lead. The main building seemed impossibly far away. She wasn't going to make it. Then light blazed ahead, torches, lanterns, and the Duke's voice cutting through the darkness like a blade. "Alara!" She stumbled toward him. He caught her, pulled her behind him, and suddenly there were guards, the Duke's men, armed and ready. Thornvale and his thugs skidded to a halt, trapped in the walkway. "Rowan," Thornvale said, composing himself with visible effort. "Thank heavens. Miss Vance broke into the East Tower. I was trying to save it." The Duke's voice was cold as winter. "I know exactly what you were trying to do. You can't prove—" "I followed her, Cedric. I've been watching since she left her room. I saw everything." He gestured to the tower, where smoke was now visible from the third-floor window. "Including you trying to burn evidence and murder a witness." Thornvale's composure finally cracked. "You can't touch me. The council will hear about this. All of it. And if they don't act, I will." The Duke stepped forward, and something in his expression made Thornvale step back. "You're finished." "We'll see about that," Thornvale spat. He turned and fled into the darkness, his men scrambling after him. The Duke watched him go, then turned to Alara. His expression shifted from fury to concern. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, still trying to catch her breath. What the hell were you thinking? Going alone after everything we discussed? I thought... She stopped, started again. I thought I could handle it. You nearly got killed. But I didn't. Her voice was shaking, but she met his eyes. And now we know for certain what he's capable of. Now we have witnesses. Your guards saw him chase me. They heard him. That's not worth your life, Ilara. It is to me. They stared at each other in the flickering torchlight. Finally, the Duke sighed. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most foolish. I haven't decided which. Can I be both? Despite everything, he almost smiled. Come on, let's get you inside before you freeze. As they walked back to the manor, Ilara glanced back at the east tower. Smoke still curled from the upper window, black against the night sky. She'd survived, barely, but Thornvale was still free, still dangerous. And she'd just made herself his primary target. The Duke's study felt like a war room. Maps spread across every surface, documents stacked in precarious towers, and 3 guards stationed outside the door. It was past 2 in the morning, but neither Ilara nor the Duke showed any sign of sleeping. He'll run, the Duke said, pacing the length of the room for the 100th time. Before dawn, if he's smart. Take what he can carry and disappear across the border. Ilara sat in the chair by the fire, still wearing her ruined dress. Dirt and ash streaked across the green velvet. Her hands had finally stopped shaking. Then we need to move faster. Move how? We have testimony from the guards, but that only proves he chased you, not why. The documents burned. We're back where we started. Not exactly. Ilara stood, walked to the desk. I read some of them before he showed up. Enough to know what we're looking for. Memory isn't evidence. No, but it's a map. She pulled a blank sheet of paper toward her, picked up a pen. He mentioned Valsara. 3 shell companies, and one of the letters I saw referenced a bank, First Maritime Trust. The Duke stopped pacing. You remember the bank name? I remember everything I read. It's how I survived, memorizing things so I wouldn't have to steal books twice. She began writing. There were transfer orders dated between March and August of last year, amounts ranging from 500 to 3,000 gold, and a signature I didn't recognize, E. Pierce. Edmund Pierce, the clerk I mentioned. The Duke moved to stand beside her, reading over her shoulder. If we can prove Pierce was acting on Thornvale's orders, we need Pierce to talk, and he won't. Not without protection. Or incentive. The Duke's expression hardened. What if we offer him immunity in exchange for testimony? You can do that? I'm the Duke. I can do whatever I want. The question is whether the council will back me. He pulled another chair over, sat down heavily. This needs to be ironclad, Ilara. If we accuse Thornvale publicly and fail to prove it, he'll sue for defamation. We'll lose everything. Then we don't accuse him publicly. Not yet. Ilara's mind was working through possibilities, discarding and rebuilding strategies like someone solving a puzzle. We go after Pierce quietly. Bring him in, offer the deal, get his testimony on record. Then we present it to the council as a complete case. Pierce lives on Thornvale's estate. We can't just walk up and ask for him. No, but we can make him come to us. Ilara met the Duke's eyes. Pierce handles the finances, right? He'd need access to duchy records to do his job properly. What if we sent an official summons, required him to appear for a financial audit? The Duke considered this. Thornvale would see through it immediately. Probably. But what can he do? If Pierce refuses a direct summons from the Duke, it makes both of them look guilty. If he complies, we get Pierce alone and make our offer. And if Thornvale sends someone else in Pierce's place? Then we summon Pierce by name. Make it clear it has to be him personally. We're not asking, we're ordering. Ilara leaned forward. Thornvale's power comes from operating in shadows. Let's drag him into the light and see how well he functions. The Duke studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled. You're getting good at this. I had a good teacher. I didn't teach you that. That's pure instinct. He stood, walked to his desk, began drafting the summons. We'll send it first thing in the morning. Require Pierce's presence within 24 hours. What about the council? Won't they question why you're conducting a financial audit now? Let them question. I'm well within my rights. His pen scratched across paper. Besides, after tonight's incident, I have grounds to investigate any suspicious financial activity. Attempted murder of my secretary tends to raise red flags. Alara touched her throat, where bruises were already forming from when Thornvale's thug had grabbed her. We should document this, the injuries, while they're fresh. Already done. I had the manor physician examine you while you were changing. His report is signed and witnessed. The Duke looked up from his writing. You should rest. Tomorrow's going to be brutal. I'm not tired. Liar. You're swaying on your feet. He set down his pen. Go. That's an order, not a suggestion. Alara wanted to argue, but exhaustion was catching up with her in waves. What about you? I'll sleep when Thornvale's in custody. Not before. She made it to the door before turning back. Your Grace. Thank you for following me tonight. If you hadn't... Don't. His voice was rough. Don't thank me for not letting you die. That's not something that requires gratitude. Still, thank you. She left before he could respond. In her room, Alara peeled off the ruined dress and examined her reflection. Bruises on her shoulder, her throat, scrapes on her palms from catching herself on the stairs. Nothing serious, but visible proof of what had happened. She thought about Thornvale's face when the Duke had appeared, the way his composure had cracked, revealing something ugly underneath. We'll see about that, he'd said. He wasn't done. Men like Thornvale never went quietly. Alara climbed into bed but couldn't sleep. Her mind kept replaying the scene in the tower. The moment she'd realized the documents were fake, the split-second decision to throw the candle, the terror of running through darkness with footsteps behind her. She'd survived on instinct and luck. Next time, she might not be so fortunate. There couldn't be a next time. Somewhere around dawn, she finally slept. The summons went out at first light, delivered by two of the Duke's guards. Alara watched from the study window as they rode toward Thornvale's estate, their horses kicking up dust on the frozen road. How long until they return? She asked. 2 hours there, 2 hours back, assuming Pierce agrees to come immediately. The Duke was already working through another stack of documents. More likely we won't see him until this afternoon. And if he doesn't come at all? Then we send the duchy militia to arrest him for defying a direct order. Either way, we get our conversation. Alara turned from the window. You really think Pierce will turn on Thornvale, even with immunity? Men like Pierce are survivors. They don't have loyalty. They have fear. Right now, he's more afraid of Thornvale than he is of me. We need to change that equation. The Duke looked up. How's your memory? Could you recreate any of those documents you saw? Some of them. The letter to the Valsara contact was very specific. I could probably reproduce most of it. Do it. Even if it's not admissible as evidence, it'll give us something to confront Pierce with. Make him think we know more than we do. Alara spent the next 3 hours writing from memory, reconstructing what she'd seen in the tower. The letter came back in fragments. Phrases about securing assets beyond duchy jurisdiction and maintaining discretion regarding source of funds. The transfer orders were harder, but she remembered amounts and dates. By noon, she'd filled 5 pages. The Duke read them carefully, his expression growing darker. This is damning, if even half of this is accurate. A knock interrupted them. One of the guards. Your Grace, Edmund Pierce has arrived. He's waiting in the small parlor. The Duke and Alara exchanged glances. Bring him to the study, the Duke said, and station 2 guards inside the room. I want witnesses for everything that's said. 5 minutes later, Edmund Pierce stood before them. He was younger than Alara had expected. Maybe 35, thin and nervous-looking, with ink stains on his fingers and dark circles under his eyes. He wouldn't meet the Duke's gaze. Mr. Pierce, thank you for coming. Your Grace, Pierce's voice was barely audible. I came as quickly as I could. Please, sit. The Duke gestured to a chair. Pierce sat like a man facing execution. I assume you know why you're here. The summons mentioned a financial audit, Your Grace. That's part of it. The other part concerns your employer, Lord Thornvale. Pierce's face went pale. Your Grace, I'm just a clerk. You handled every transaction related to duchy land sales for the past 5 years. You processed transfers to shell companies in Valsara. You forged documents under Thornvale's direction. The Duke's voice was level, factual. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending ignorance. I don't know what you're talking about. Then let me refresh your memory. The Duke nodded to Alara. She placed the reconstructed documents on the desk. Pierce's eyes went to the papers. His face somehow got paler. These are copies, the Duke said, of documents we recovered from Thornvale's possession. They detail a systematic embezzlement scheme spanning years. Your signature appears on most of them. It was a bluff. The real documents had burned. But Pierce didn't know that. I was following orders, Pierce whispered. He said it was legal, that the Duke, your father, had approved everything. My father was barely coherent his last 2 years. You knew that. I needed the work. I have a family debts. Thornvale offered me a position when no one else would. I couldn't refuse him, but you can help us now. The Duke's tone softened fractionally. Mr. Pierce, I'm not interested in destroying your life. You were following orders from a man who manipulated you. I understand that. What I need is the truth. Pierce looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. The truth? Everything. Every transaction, every transfer, every forged document. You testify before the Duchy Council, provide complete documentation, and in exchange, the Duke pulled out a prepared document. I grant you full immunity from prosecution. Thornvale will kill me. Thornvale will be in custody before the day is out. You have my word. Pierce stared at the immunity agreement like it was a lifeline and a noose simultaneously. I don't know. Let me make this simpler, the Duke said. Right now, you're the only person who can connect Thornvale to these crimes. That makes you extremely valuable to me and extremely dangerous to him. If you don't accept this deal, you're on your own. Thornvale will eliminate you to protect himself, and I won't be able to stop it. Take the deal, and you're under the Duchy's protection. You and your family. My family? We'll move them to secure housing within the manor grounds. Guards, safety, whatever you need. Pierce's hands were shaking. What do you need from me? Start with the Valsara accounts. Who set them up? How was money transferred? Who else knew about them? For the next 2 hours, Pierce talked. Alara took notes, her hand cramping from the pace. The Duke asked pointed questions, clarifying details, pressing for specifics. The picture that emerged was worse than they'd imagined. Thornvale hadn't just embezzled Duchy funds, he'd been systematically looting the estate for nearly a decade, using the old Duke's illness to cover his tracks. Pierce provided dates, amounts, account numbers, everything. There's one more thing, Pierce said as they neared the end. Thornvale has a ledger, a master record of every transaction. He keeps it in his private study, locked in a safe behind the fireplace. The Duke leaned forward. You've seen this ledger? Once, about 2 years ago. He was drunk, got careless, left it out while I was working late. Pierce swallowed. It's bound in red leather. Every page is in his handwriting. If you get that ledger, you have everything. And the safe? How is it secured? Combination lock. I don't know the numbers. The Duke sat back thinking. Could you find it again, if we got you inside the estate? Your Grace, Alara cut in. That's too dangerous. If Thornvale catches Pierce back on his property, I'm not suggesting we ask permission. The Duke turned to Pierce. Would you be willing to help us retrieve this ledger? Under armed escort? Pierce looked terrified, but nodded. If it ends this, yes. Then we move tonight, after dark. Small team, myself, 3 guards. Mr. Pierce. He glanced at Alara. You'll stay here. Like hell I will. Alara, I've earned the right to see this through. I'm coming. They locked eyes. The Duke's expression was somewhere between exasperation and admiration. Fine, but you stay outside the estate with half the guards. If anything goes wrong, I know. Run back to the manor and raise the alarm. I was going to say fight like hell, but sure, that works too. They rode out at midnight, 6 riders dressed in dark clothes moving silently through sleeping countryside. Pierce rode between 2 guards, looking like he might bolt at any moment. Alara stayed close to the Duke, her heart hammering. Thornvale's estate appeared through bare trees, a dark shape against darker sky. Most windows were black, but light showed in a few upper rooms. He's still awake, one of the guards murmured. Good, the Duke said. Means he's worried. Worried people make mistakes. They dismounted a 1/4 mile from the main house. The Duke organized them quickly. 2 guards with Alara at the tree line, 2 with him and Pierce approaching the manor. 15 minutes, he told Alara. If we're not back, assume the worst and go. Rowan, she caught herself. Your Grace, be careful. Always. He almost smiled. Then he was gone, melting into shadow with Pierce and the guards. Elara waited in the cold darkness, counting seconds. One of her guards, a man named Marcus, stood with his hand on his sword, eyes scanning the estate. He'll be fine, Marcus said quietly. His Grace survived 10 years of war. This is nothing. War is predictable. Thornvale isn't. Fair point. Minutes crawled past. Elara's eyes adjusted to the darkness enough to make out shapes. The manor, outbuildings, what looked like stables. No movement, no sound. Then a light flared in one of the ground floor windows. Elara tensed. That's the study, Marcus said. Right where Pierce said it would be. More waiting. Elara's fingers had gone numb despite her gloves. She shifted from foot to foot, trying to maintain circulation. A door opened. 3 figures emerged, moving quickly across the lawn. The Duke, Pierce, and 1 guard. But where was... A shout erupted from inside the manor. Lights blazed in multiple windows. The missing guard burst from a side entrance, running flat out. Go! The Duke's voice carried across the distance. Now! They ran for the horses. Elara was already mounted by the time the Duke reached her. He threw something to Marcus, a red leather book, and hauled himself into the saddle. Ride! They didn't need to be told twice. 6 horses thundered into the night, pursued by shouts and the sound of dogs barking. They didn't slow until they'd put 3 miles between themselves and Thornvale's estate. The Duke finally signaled a halt, breathing hard. Is everyone intact? Affirmatives all around. The missing guard, a young man named Thomas, had a split lip but was grinning. Ran into one of Thornvale's men coming down the stairs. Had to convince him to let me pass. You have blood on your knuckles. He was very persuasive, eventually. The Duke turned to Marcus. The ledger? Marcus handed it over. Even in moonlight, the red leather gleamed. The Duke opened it, angled it to catch what little light there was, and began reading. His expression hardened with each page. We have him, he said finally. Every transaction, every account, all in his own handwriting. He looked at Pierce. Mr. Pierce, you may have just saved the duchy. Pierce looked like he might cry from relief. They rode back to Halbrecht Manor as dawn began breaking in the east, painting the sky in shades of gray and pale gold. Elara felt exhaustion pulling at her, but also something else. Exhilaration. They'd done it. They had the proof. Now they just needed to survive long enough to use it. The emergency council session was called for noon. The Duke sent notices to all 12 members, marked urgent and mandatory. By 11:30, they were gathering in the Great Hall, confused, annoyed, and in Thornvale's case, visibly furious. Rowan, this is highly irregular, Lord Ashford complained. Some of us have estates to run. This won't take long, the Duke said. He stood at the head of the table, the red ledger in front of him. Elara sat to his right with her notes. Pierce sat to his left, flanked by guards. Thornvale took his seat at the far end, his face a mask of pleasant neutrality. But Elara could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept flickering to the ledger. Gentlemen, the Duke began, I've called you here to present evidence of criminal activity within the Duchy Council. Murmurs rippled around the table. Last night, with the assistance of Mr. Edmund Pierce and Duchy guards, I retrieved financial records from Lord Thornvale's estate. These records, he placed his hand on the ledger, detail a systematic embezzlement scheme that has cost the duchy approximately 80,000 gold over the past decade. The murmurs became shouts. Thornvale stood slowly. Rowan, I don't know what lies this man has told you, he pointed at Pierce, but breaking into my home and stealing my property is not legal investigation. It's duchy property, the Duke cut in. Everything in this ledger concerns duchy finances. That makes it subject to official investigation. And before you claim the search was illegal, I had a warrant. He pulled a document from his jacket, signed by 3 council members this morning after I presented them with preliminary evidence. Thornvale's composure cracked. This is a witch hunt. You're so desperate to discredit me that you've resorted to theft and coercion? Then let's examine the evidence, Lord Ashford said quietly. If it's fabricated, that will become apparent quickly. For the next hour, the Duke walked the council through the ledger's contents. Pierce corroborated each entry, providing context and additional documentation. Alara presented her notes from the destroyed documents, showing how they matched Pierce's testimony. The council members' expressions shifted from skepticism to shock to anger. "This account here," one of them said, pointing to an entry, "that's duchy tax revenue. It should have gone to infrastructure repairs." "It went to Thornvale Holdings instead," the Duke confirmed. "And this sale of common land, we never authorized that." "No, but my father's seal authorized it, or rather, a forgery of his seal." All eyes turned to Thornvale. He stood rigid at the end of the table, his mask finally shattered. "You have no proof the seal was forged." "Actually, we do." The Duke nodded to Alara. She produced a document comparing the forged seal to legitimate ones, highlighting the differences. The forger was skilled, but not perfect. The seal used on these transactions is 0.3 millimeters too wide, a flaw that suggests it was cast from a wax impression rather than the original. This is circumstantial. Combined with Mr. Pierce's sworn testimony, the ledger in your own handwriting, and bank records we've subpoenaed from First Maritime Trust in Valsara, it's enough. The Duke's voice was cold. "Lord Cedric Thornvale, I'm formally charging you with embezzlement, fraud, and attempted murder. You're hereby removed from the Duchy Council pending criminal trial." The room exploded, councilmen shouting questions, Thornvale screaming about injustice, guards moving to restrain him. Through it all, Alara sat quietly, watching the man who'd tried to kill her being dragged from the room. It should have felt like victory. Instead, she felt hollow, tired, used up. The Duke called the meeting to order. "Gentlemen, we have much to discuss regarding the recovery of stolen funds and the restructuring of duchy finances. But first, I want to formally recognize someone whose courage and intelligence made this investigation possible." He turned to Alara. "Miss Alara Vance has served this duchy her entire life. Recently, she's served in ways that went far beyond her original duties. She's been threatened, attacked, and nearly killed, all because she refused to let corruption go unchallenged. Without her, Thornvale would still be bleeding us dry." Alara felt heat crawl up her neck. Every eye in the room was on her. "Effective immediately, I'm appointing Miss Vance as Duchy Financial Secretary. She'll oversee all monetary transactions and report directly to me and the Council." The silence was absolute. Then Lord Ashford began to clap. Slowly, others joined him. Not everyone. Several councilmen sat with arms crossed, faces sour. But enough. Enough to make it real. After the meeting ended and the councilmen filed out, Alara remained seated, staring at her hands. "Alara?" She looked up. The Duke stood over her, concern in his eyes. "I just made you one of the most powerful people in the duchy. Say something." "I don't know what to say." "Thank you is traditional." "Thank you." The words felt inadequate. "Your Grace, I'm not qualified for this. I don't have training, education. You have something better. You have integrity, and you're smart enough to learn the rest." He sat in the chair beside her. "Besides, half those men in there inherited their positions from fathers who inherited from fathers. None of them were particularly qualified either. At least you earned yours. They're going to fight this. Some of them looked ready to murder me. Let them fight. You've already survived Thornvale. The Council is nothing compared to that." Alara wanted to believe him, but she'd seen the faces, the resentment, the disgust. The servant girl promoted above her station. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we rebuild, starting with recovering every coin Thornvale stole." The Duke stood, offered his hand. "Come on, your new office is waiting." He led her to a room on the second floor, smaller than his study but well appointed, with windows overlooking the gardens and a desk that had probably cost more than she used to earn in a year. "It's too much." "It's exactly right." He moved to the door. "Get settled. Tomorrow we start hunting down Thornvale's hidden accounts." After he left, Alara walked slowly around the room. Her office, her position, her life, transformed beyond recognition. She thought about the girl who'd scrubbed floors just weeks ago, who'd hidden in corners and made herself invisible. That girl was gone, dead, replaced by someone Alara barely recognized. She sat at the desk, her desk, and looked out at the frozen gardens, at the world she'd helped save. And for the first time in her life, Alara Vance allowed herself to believe she might actually deserve to be seen. And for the first time in her life, Alara Vance allowed herself to believe she might actually deserve to be seen. The belief lasted exactly 3 days. On the 4th morning of her new position, Alara arrived at her office to find the door hanging open and every document she'd been working on scattered across the floor. Her desk had been overturned, ink spilled across papers that had taken her hours to organize, and written on the wall in the same ash-black letters she'd seen before. "Servants don't sit at the table." She stood in the doorway, rage and exhaustion warring inside her chest. The rage won. "Get the Duke," she told the guard stationed outside. "Now!" He arrived within minutes, took one look at the destruction, and his expression went cold enough to freeze fire. "Who had access to this floor last night?" "Only household staff, Your Grace. The guard rotation changed at midnight, but get me a list of every person who entered this wing, every servant, every guard, every one." The Duke turned to Alara. "Are you hurt?" "No, just angry." "Good. Use it." He began gathering the scattered papers. "This is what they want. To make you feel like you don't belong. To break you down until you quit." "I'm not quitting. I know. That's why we're going to find whoever did this and make an example of them." It took 6 hours and interrogations of 14 servants before they found the culprit, a young footman named David who'd worked at the manor for 3 years. Under questioning, he cracked immediately. "I didn't mean any real harm. I was just... They said you were getting too big for your station, that someone needed to remind you." "Who's they?" the Duke demanded. David's eyes darted to the floor. "Some of the staff. And Lord Marchmont said he'd pay me 50 gold if I did it." Alara felt something cold settle in her stomach. Lord Marchmont was on the council. One of the men who'd sat stone-faced during her appointment. "Lord Marchmont put you up to this," the Duke said slowly. "A council member conspired to vandalize duchy property and intimidate a duchy official." "I didn't know it was that serious. I thought it was just a prank. Get out. You're dismissed from service effective immediately." After David was escorted out, the Duke turned to Alara. Marchmont crossed a line. "He's a lord. What are you going to do? Arrest him?" "No. But I can remove him from the council, and I will." He moved to the window, jaw tight. "This is about more than you, Alara. If they think they can intimidate duchy officials without consequence, the whole system collapses." "Or maybe," Alara said quietly, "they're right. Maybe I don't belong at that table." He whirled on her. Don't let them make you doubt yourself." "I'm not doubting myself. I'm being realistic. I'm 17 years old with no formal education, no family name, no connections. Half the council wants me gone. Most of the staff hates me. And now lords are paying servants to terrorize me." She gestured at the destroyed office. "Maybe this fight isn't worth it." "Is that what you really think?" Alara looked at the overturned desk, the scattered papers, the message on the wall. She thought about Pip's sad eyes, about Thornvale's threats, about every person who'd ever told her to know her place. "No," she said finally, "but I'm tired of fighting alone." "You're not alone. You have me." "For how long? Until the council forces you to choose between keeping me and maintaining their support? Until it becomes politically inconvenient?" She met his eyes. "I know how this works, Your Grace. Eventually, you'll have to sacrifice me to keep the peace." "That won't happen." "You can't promise that." The silence stretched between them, heavy with things neither could say. Finally, the Duke spoke. "The formal council hearing on Thornvale's case is in 3 days. He's demanding the right to defend himself publicly, to present his own evidence." The council agreed. Alara's stomach dropped. "He's going to attack me, make it about my credibility instead of his crimes." "Probably. Which is why we need to be prepared, not just with documents, but with you. Your testimony will be the linchpin of the entire case." "I'm not a good liar. I don't want you to lie. I want you to tell the truth so convincingly that no one can doubt it." He helped her write the desk. "We have 3 days. Let's use them." They drilled relentlessly. The Duke played Thornvale's attorney, asking every hostile question he could imagine. Alara answered until her voice went hoarse. They rehearsed her posture, her delivery, the precise way to respond to insults without appearing defensive. "He'll try to make you angry," the Duke said on the second day. "Anger makes you look unstable, untrustworthy." "What if I am angry?" "Then channel it into something useful, cold clarity instead of hot rage." On the third morning, Alara woke before dawn and couldn't go back to sleep. She dressed carefully in one of the gowns Margot had made, deep blue, professional, nothing that could be called provocative or inappropriate. She pulled her hair back severely. No jewelry, nothing that could be used against her. The hearing was scheduled for noon in the Great Hall. By 11, spectators were already filling the gallery. Nobles, merchants, even some common citizens who'd heard rumors and wanted to witness the spectacle. Alara entered with the Duke and felt the weight of hundreds of eyes. She kept her spine straight, her expression neutral, and took her seat at the table reserved for duchy officials. Across the room, Thornvale sat with his attorney, a sharp-faced man named Cornelius Webb, who had a reputation for destroying witnesses. Thornvale looked immaculate as always, projecting wounded dignity and righteous indignation. Lord Ashford, serving as council chairman, called the hearing to order. We're here to examine charges of embezzlement, fraud, and attempted murder against Lord Cedric Thornvale. The duchy will present its evidence first, followed by Lord Thornvale's defense. He nodded to the Duke. Your Grace, you may begin. The Duke stood. For the next hour, he methodically laid out the case. The ledger, Pierce's testimony, bank records from Valsara, transfer orders, everything. The gallery murmured. Several council members looked genuinely shocked. Apparently, the preliminary briefing hadn't conveyed the full scope of Thornvale's crimes. Then it was Webb's turn. Your Grace, he began, voice smooth as silk. Your evidence is certainly extensive, but it rests on 3 pillars. A ledger obtained through illegal search, the testimony of a disgraced clerk facing his own criminal charges, and the word of a teenage girl with no credentials and every reason to fabricate stories to advance her own position. The search was authorized by warrant, the Duke countered. A warrant obtained using falsified preliminary evidence provided by that same teenage girl. Webb turned to the council. Gentlemen, this entire investigation is built on a foundation of lies told by someone with no accountability and everything to gain. Miss Vance has been nothing but truthful, has she? Webb produced a document. I have here a statement from Mrs. Helena Haverton, head housekeeper at Halbrecht Manor, stating that Miss Vance was repeatedly disciplined for theft during her time as a servant, stealing food, supplies, even books from the Duke's library. Alara felt heat crawl up her neck. The Duke's expression darkened. Those incidents were minor, and years ago, they establish a pattern of dishonesty and theft, hardly the credentials of a trustworthy witness. Webb smiled. And then there's the question of Miss Vance's relationship with your Grace, living in the family wing, attending formal dinners, receiving gifts and preferential treatment. Some might say her loyalty has been purchased. That's a disgusting insinuation, the Duke said coldly. Is it? Or is it simply acknowledgement of reality? Webb turned to Alara. Miss Vance, would you say you're grateful to His Grace for elevating you from servant to secretary? Alara stood slowly. I'm grateful for the opportunity, yes. Grateful enough to lie for him? To fabricate evidence against his political enemies? I haven't lied about anything. So you maintain that you witnessed Lord Thornvale attempt to murder you in the East Tower? Yes, and yet the documents you claim to have seen, the proof of his crimes, were conveniently destroyed in a fire. How convenient that the only evidence of this alleged murder attempt is your word. And the word of the Duke's guards who saw Thornvale chase me. The Duke's guards who serve at his pleasure and would lose their positions if they contradicted his narrative, hardly impartial witnesses. Webb leaned forward. Tell me, Miss Vance, how much is the Duke paying you for your current position? I don't see how that's relevant. Answer the question. Alara looked at the Duke. He nodded fractionally. 300 gold per year. Gasps rippled through the gallery. It was an enormous salary for someone her age and background. 300 gold, Webb repeated, more than most skilled craftsmen earn. And in exchange for this generous compensation, you provide testimony against the Duke's enemies. A very profitable arrangement. That's not what happened, isn't it? You were nothing, a servant scrubbing floors. Then the Duke returned, took an interest in you, elevated you to impossible heights. And now you sit in judgment of lords who've served this duchy for decades. Some might call that gratitude, others might call it corruption. Alara's hands clenched into fists under the table. Cold clarity, she reminded herself, not hot rage. Mr. Webb, she said, keeping her voice level. You're very good at making me sound suspicious, but you haven't addressed a single piece of actual evidence. The ledger exists. The bank accounts exist. Edmund Pierce's testimony exists. My credibility doesn't change those facts. Your credibility is the only thing that makes those facts relevant. Without your initial accusations, there would be no investigation. Without your supposed encounter in the East Tower, there would be no attempted murder charge. You're not a witness to Lord Thornvale's crimes. You're the architect of this entire persecution. He turned to the council. Gentlemen, I ask you to consider what we're really seeing here. A young woman with ambition but no prospects saw an opportunity. She ingratiated herself with a duke desperate to reform his late father's legacy. She whispered accusations, planted doubts, and eventually manufactured evidence to support a narrative that serves her patron's political goals. This isn't justice. It's a palace coup dressed up as an investigation. Elara felt the room shifting. Several council members were nodding. The crowd's murmurs had changed tone, less shocked, more skeptical. She looked at the duke. His expression was controlled, but she could see the tension in his jaw. They were losing. Then Lord Ashford spoke. Mr. Webb, your arguments are compelling, but there remains the question of the ledger. That's physical evidence in Lord Thornvale's own handwriting. How do you explain that? Webb smiled. Simple. It's genuine. My client kept detailed records of his financial activities, both personal and duchy related. What the prosecution characterizes as embezzlement, we contend were authorized transactions made with the late Duke's full knowledge and approval. My father wouldn't have approved theft from his own estate. Your father was dying and desperate to maintain appearances. Lord Thornvale helped him manage that transition gracefully. If some funds were redirected to preserve the duchy's stability, that was a necessary evil, not a crime. 80,000 gold isn't a redirection, it's theft on a massive scale. Or it's the cost of preventing total collapse. Gentlemen, the previous duke was not the man you remember. In his final years, he made decisions that would have bankrupted the duchy. Lord Thornvale prevented that disaster, at great personal risk and with no recognition. Now he's being punished for his loyalty. The gallery erupted in argument. Ashford called for order, but it took several minutes to restore quiet. Elara felt panic rising in her throat. Everything was slipping away. Thornvale's attorney had turned the narrative completely around, made embezzlement sound like salvation, made her sound like an opportunist. Then she remembered something Pierce had said during his testimony, something specific. She stood. Your Grace, may I address the council? Ashford looked uncertain. This is highly irregular. Let her speak, the Duke said. Elara walked to the center of the room, suddenly very aware of how young she looked, how out of place. But she'd spent 17 years being underestimated. Time to use it. Mr. Webb is right about one thing, she began. I am ambitious. I do want to rise above my birth, but not through lies or manipulation. I want to earn it. She turned to face the council directly. You all knew the late Duke. You saw his decline. Did any of you, even once, see Lord Thornvale consult with you about financial decisions? Did he present any of these necessary transactions for approval? Silence. No, because they weren't authorized. They were hidden, and I can prove it. She walked to the evidence table, rifled through documents until she found what she wanted, a transfer order from the ledger. This transaction is dated March 15th, 3 years ago. 5,000 gold transferred to a shell company in Valsara. She held it up. Mr. Webb claims this was done with the late Duke's knowledge, but March 15th was the anniversary of the Duchess's death. The late Duke spent that day locked in his chambers, too drunk to stand. I know because I was the one who cleaned up after him. She pulled out another document. This one is dated August 7th, 2 years ago, 3,000 gold. August 7th was the day the late Duke suffered his first stroke. He was unconscious for 3 days, physically impossible for him to authorize anything. She went through 6 more transactions, each with specific dates that contradicted the possibility of the late Duke's involvement. The council members were leaning forward now, paying attention. Lord Thornvale didn't save the duchy from collapse. He created the collapse so he could profit from it, and he counted on no one bothering to check the details because I'm just a servant girl who couldn't possibly understand finance. She set down the documents. But I do understand. I understand that theft is theft, no matter how you dress it up. And I understand that power comes with responsibility, not just privilege. She looked directly at Thornvale. I used to scrub your floors, my lord. I used to be invisible to you. But I saw everything. Every transaction, every lie, every moment you thought no one was watching. That's your mistake. You forgot that invisible people are still people. And we remember. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Thornvale laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. This is absurd. You're taking the word of a servant over a lord of the realm. We're taking documented evidence over convenient excuses, Lord Ashford interrupted. Miss Vance raises valid points. These dates require explanation. Webb tried to recover, but the momentum had shifted. For the next hour, the council pressed Thornvale on specific transactions. His answers grew more evasive, more defensive. Finally, faced with irrefutable evidence and a room that had turned against him, Thornvale stood. You want the truth? Fine. Yes, I took the money. The duchy was rotting from within, and that weak old man was too drunk to notice. I saved this estate from complete ruin, and instead of gratitude, I get persecution from a boy playing at being duke and his pet servant girl. The gallery exploded. Guards had to restrain people from rushing the floor. I regret nothing, Thornvale continued, his composure finally shattered. Halbrecht would be ruins without me. And you, he pointed at Alara, you're still just a servant. No title will change that. You'll always be nothing. Maybe, Alara said quietly, but I'm nothing that destroyed you. Ashford's gavel came down. Lord Cedric Thornvale, you are hereby found guilty of embezzlement and fraud. Your assets are seized, your title revoked, and you are sentenced to 20 years imprisonment. Guards, remove him. Thornvale fought as they dragged him out, screaming about injustice and corruption. His voice faded down the corridor. The hearing dissolved into chaos, council members arguing, spectators shouting, clerks trying desperately to maintain order. Through it all, Alara stood in the center of the room, feeling strangely disconnected from her own body. She'd won. They'd won. So why did she feel so empty? Well, the Duke found her an hour later, sitting alone in her office, staring at nothing. You were brilliant, he said. I was angry. You channeled it perfectly. That speech about invisible people, the council is still talking about it. Alara didn't respond. She was thinking about Thornvale's face as they dragged him away, the hatred in his eyes. What happens now? She asked. Now we recover the stolen funds and rebuild the duchy's finances. It'll take years, but it's possible. He sat in the chair across from her. The council voted to make your appointment permanent. Full voting rights, pension, the whole package. They did? Ashford said you earned it. Even Marchmont voted yes, though I think he was terrified of what I'd do if he didn't. The Duke smiled. You have allies now, Alara. Real ones. She wanted to feel relief. Victory. Something other than this bone-deep exhaustion. I keep thinking about what he said, that I'll always be nothing. He was lashing out, trying to hurt you because he'd lost. But he wasn't wrong. I am still that servant girl, I just have better clothes now. The Duke leaned forward. You're wrong. That servant girl scrubbed floors and stayed silent and made herself invisible to survive. The woman sitting in front of me fought a corrupt lord to a standstill and won. They're not the same person, aren't they? I still feel like that girl, still waiting for someone to realize I don't belong here and send me back to the kitchens. Then let me tell you something I've learned from 10 years of war. His voice was serious. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. You've been terrified this entire time, and you never stopped fighting. That's not pretending to be brave. That's actual bravery. Alara met his eyes. What if I mess this up? What if I make a mistake and prove everyone right? Then you'll fix it. Learn from it. Keep going. He stood. You're not going to be perfect, Alara. No one is. But you're going to be good enough. And that's what matters. After he left, Alara sat alone with those words. Good enough. Not perfect. Not beyond criticism. Just good enough. Maybe that was all anyone could be. Peanut. The seasons changed. Winter gave way to spring, and Halbrecht Manor came alive with restoration. The Duke hired back staff, repaired neglected buildings, reopened wings that had been closed for years. The duchy's finances stabilized as recovered funds were properly allocated. Alara worked 18-hour days, learning accounting practices, legal frameworks, investment strategies. She made mistakes, approved payments she shouldn't have, missed discrepancies in reports, once accidentally overpaid a supplier by 300 gold. But she learned, adapted, improved. The servants' attitude shifted slowly. Some still resented her, but others, especially the younger ones, began seeing her as proof that their circumstances weren't permanent, that intelligence and determination could overcome birth. Pip approached her one afternoon while Alara was reviewing ledgers in the garden. "Miss Alara, I wanted to ask, do you think I could learn to read?" Alara looked up. Pip stood there twisting her apron, nervous but hopeful. "I think you could learn anything you wanted to," Alara said. "Why do you ask?" "Because if you can go from cleaning to running duchy finances, maybe I could, I don't know, be something more than a scullery maid." Alara felt something crack open in her chest, something warm and painful and hopeful. "Come to my office tomorrow morning before your shift starts. I'll teach you myself." Pip's face lit up. "Really? Really? And bring anyone else who wants to learn." The next morning, 7 servants showed up. By the end of the week, it was 15. Alara taught them before dawn and after dusk, fitting lessons around her official duties. The Duke provided books and supplies without being asked. "You're building something," he told her one evening, watching her prepare lesson materials. "A system where people can rise based on merit instead of birth. That's more revolutionary than anything I could do." "I'm just teaching people to read." "No, you're teaching them they matter. That's infinitely more powerful." 6 months after Thornvale's conviction, the Duchy Council called a formal assembly to recognize Alara's contributions. She stood before a packed hall while Lord Ashford read a proclamation acknowledging her role in saving duchy finances and reforming the administrative system. "Furthermore," Ashford continued, "in recognition of her service and in accordance with duchy law, we hereby grant Alara Vance the title of Lady Vance, with all rights and privileges appertaining thereto." The hall erupted in applause. Not everyone clapped. There were still sour faces, still resentment. But enough did. Enough to matter. Alara felt tears prick her eyes. A title. An actual title. The orphan servant girl was now nobility. After the ceremony, people swarmed her. Council members offering congratulations, merchants seeking meetings, nobles who'd previously ignored her suddenly very interested in her opinions. She escaped to the gardens, needing air and quiet. The Duke found her there, as she'd known he would. "Lady Vance has a nice ring to it. It feels wrong, like I'm wearing someone else's clothes." "It's not wrong. You earned it, arguably more than most people born into titles." He stood beside her, looking out at the formal gardens that had been restored to their former beauty. "I have something for you." He handed her a small box. Inside was a signet ring, gold, with a seal showing a rising sun. "Every noble house has a seal. Now you do too." Alara stared at it. "I don't have a house. I don't have family." "Then start one. Build something that lasts beyond you. Pass on everything you've learned to people who come after." He smiled. "You've already started with those reading lessons." She slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "Rowan?" She'd started using his first name in private months ago. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible." "I didn't make you visible, Alara. You did that yourself. I just had the good sense to pay attention." They stood together in the gardens as evening fell, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Around them, the manor hummed with life. Servants working, guards patrolling, the ordinary business of a functioning household. Alara thought about the girl who'd knelt in corridors, scrubbing marble until her hands bled, who'd taught herself to read from garbage, who'd survived by being nothing. That girl was gone, but she'd also never left. She lived in every decision Alara made, every lesson she taught, every person she helped. The distance between who she'd been and who she'd become wasn't a gap to be crossed. It was a foundation to build on. "I want to establish a school," she said suddenly, "for servants and common children. Teach them reading, mathematics, basic law. Give them the tools to rise. The council will fight it. Education for the lower classes threatens the established order. Let them fight. I've gotten good at that." She turned to face him. "Will you support it?" "Always." He held out his hand. "Partners?" She took it. "Partners." Daishin. 5 years later, Alara stood in the great hall of Halbrecht Manor, watching students from her school perform a presentation on financial ethics for the Duchy Council. 20 young people, servants' children, orphans, common-born kids who'd never had opportunities before, demonstrating knowledge that put half the nobility to shame. Lord Ashford, now elderly but still sharp, leaned over to her. "You've built something remarkable, Lady Vance. This school of yours is changing the entire duchy." "It's changing me too," Alara said. And it was true. Teaching had given her purpose beyond survival, beyond proving herself. She'd discovered that visibility wasn't an end goal, it was a responsibility, a platform to lift others. The Duke, now husband, after a wedding that scandalized half the realm and inspired the other half, stood beside her, watching the presentation with obvious pride. "Remember when you said you didn't belong here?" he murmured. "I remember. Look around. You didn't just belong. You rebuilt the entire definition of belonging." Alara looked at the hall, at council members who'd once wanted her gone, now nodding approvingly at her students, at servants who'd learned to read in her classes, now serving as teaching assistants, at a system slowly transforming from one based on birth to one based on merit. It wasn't perfect. There was still resistance, still people who believed the old ways were better. But change was happening. Real change. After the presentation, one of her students, a girl named Sarah, who reminded Alara painfully of herself, approached nervously. "Lady Vance, I wanted to thank you for everything. Before your school, I thought I'd spend my life in the kitchens. Now I'm apprenticing with the duchy treasurer." Alara smiled. "You earned that position. I just opened the door. You did more than that. You showed us we could walk through it." After Sarah left, Alara stood alone for a moment, feeling the weight and lightness of what they'd built. The servant girl who'd been invisible was gone, but her ghost lived in every student who learned to read, every orphan who discovered their potential, every person who realized their circumstances didn't define their future. Alara Vance had started as nothing, had been told she was nothing, had been treated as nothing. But nothing, she'd discovered, was just the beginning. Rowan found her standing by the window, lost in thought. "What are you thinking about?" "Sparrows and hawks," she said. "What about them?" "Thornvale told me a story once about a sparrow who befriended a hawk. He said the hawk eventually got hungry and ate the sparrow because nature always reasserts itself." "That's grim." "It is. But he was wrong about one thing." She turned to face her husband, her partner, her equal. "He assumed the sparrow would always be prey. He never considered that the sparrow might learn to fly higher than the hawk ever could." Rowan smiled. "And did it?" Alara looked out at the duchy they'd rebuilt together, at the school that would outlast them both, at a future where birth mattered less than ability, where invisible people could become visible through their own efforts. "Yes," she said. "It did." Outside, the sun was setting over Halbrecht Manor, painting everything in shades of gold. The duchy stretched before them, imperfect, still changing, but undeniably better than it had been. Alara Vance, once a nameless servant, now Lady Vance, financial secretary and founder of the duchy's first common school, stood in the place she'd built for herself. Not because someone had given it to her, not because she'd been chosen, but because she'd refused to stay invisible, because she'd learned that dignity, once awakened, couldn't be buried again. And because sometimes the greatest revolution begins with a single person who decides they deserve to be seen. The servant girl who scrubbed floors was gone, but the woman who'd replaced her, scarred, imperfect, still learning, still fighting, was just beginning.